Today's session is hosted by Edmentum. My name is James Hayden. I lead Edmentum's work across the Middle East, and I have the privilege of working with schools throughout the GCC, some of whom are on the call today. I support with learning continuity, intervention strategies, and student achievement, and it's my pleasure to host today's discussion. Now, I should say that while some of our panelists do use Edmentum solutions in their schools, today's discussion is not a product demonstration. It's an opportunity to hear directly from experienced school leaders and education experts about what learning continuity looks like in practice. We will be hosting a product demonstration on the 16th of June, and the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed the two QR codes as you joined, one for our product session and another to book a one-to-one with my team. Both will be displayed again at the end of the session. So please do use those to either book yourself onto the webinar or to book an appointment with myself or my team. In our previous webinar, we focused on delivering high quality learning during disruption, something that everybody on this call has had to deal with. Today, we're taking that conversation one step further. Schools continue to face a common challenge. Students arrive with different experiences, sometimes very different levels of confidence and different learning needs. So the question becomes, how do schools identify those needs early, respond effectively, and ensure every learner continues to make progress? And as we approach the end of the academic year, many school leaders are also thinking about how they finish strongly and prepare students for the next academic year at the same time. That's part of what we're going to be exploring today. I am delighted to be joined by an outstanding panel, each bringing a different perspective, but all working to solve many of the same challenges that schools are facing right now, that people in the audience are facing right now. So, first of all, we have Gemma Thornley, Principal at the Arbor School. We have Dr. Tim Hughes, Director of Academic Quality Assurance and School Improvement at Bloom Education. Lee Dabagia, Principal at Summit International School. Jeffrey Sykes, Principal at International Academic School. Dan Williams, Head of Lab Schools at ISP. And last, but by no means least, my colleague Gareth Broderick, International Portfolio Manager for Edmentum. Now, rather than me reading biographies, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their role, and share some context about the school or schools that they support. Gemma, if we could come to you first, that would be great.
Thanks, James. Hi, everybody. My name is Gemma Thornley. I am the principal of the Arbor School, which is a K-12 school, British curriculum school here in the United Arab Emirates, Dubai. I've been in position at this school for 2 years, but I've been in Dubai for 14 years and worked across many different schools and different types of schools. Our school is a little unique. We are a British curriculum school, but we have a very, very strong underpinning and an ecological and environmental education lens that is an integrated curriculum that sits alongside it. So it's a little bit experimental at times, but we thoroughly enjoy what we do, and it's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much. Dr. Tim, if you'd like to go next.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Tim Hughes, currently working in Bloom Education as the Director of QA and School Improvement, working across multiple schools, carrying out school reviews and then supporting the schools through my central corporate team to lead the school improvement journey as best as we can in the context that we're in, and we're having a fantastic time despite the challenges of the disruptions and all the rest of it. We're having a great time, and it's lovely to be here this afternoon.
Again, thank you very much for joining us. Lee, if you'd like to go next.
Sure. Thank you, James. Thank you for having me. My name is Lee Dabagia. I am the principal at Summit International School in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. We are an American curriculum school. We've got over 60 different nationalities. So that is our challenge when we talk about continuity. And I've been in the United Emirates for 13 years and just loving this kind of good fight with this international school and trying to teach these language learners. So thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you for coming. Jeffrey, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, thanks, James. I appreciate it. Good to be with you guys today on this panel, and I appreciate everybody that's here to joined the conversation. Been a partner with Edmentum for about a decade now. 3 different schools in the process of school improvement and building that student progress and attainment. And like Lee was talking about, we are dealing with second language learners here. So bridging that gap is a big gap to bridge because you have some that are very much fluent, and then you have some that are very even below foundational. So having a partner that can help you with that has been a great resource for us. So looking forward to our discussion today. Thank you.
Well, it's very kind of you to share those positive words about it. We've enjoyed having you as a partner for that period of time. Dan, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, James. Thanks for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be alongside kind of such other esteemed speakers. Not that I'm an esteemed speaker, but there you go. Head of lab schools at ISP, so International Schools Partnership. We have around 120 schools globally, 9 of which are in the Middle East, so across the UAE and Qatar. My role as head of lab schools is really to pilot any kind of new ed tech or AI innovation that we think will really help us from a learning perspective rather than from a kind of pure technology perspective. ExactPath was actually one of those tools through Edmentum that we piloted. And we're now actually on the journey to roll out a number of those ed tech tools across all 120 of our schools as well, starting with the schools in the Middle East. So really pleased to be here and really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Dan. And you are definitely an esteemed speaker, and we're very glad to have you.
Thank you.
And as a quick side note, the product webinar will be running on the 16th is focused exactly on ExactPath. So if anybody's interested in having a deeper dive into that is one to turn up for. Right, Gareth, if you'd like to just introduce yourself, and then we can get on with the show.
Yeah, thanks, James. So yeah, hi everyone. My name's Gareth Bradwick. I'm the International Portfolio Manager for Edmentum. I've been with the company for about 13 years and in education for about 17 years. My role is to ensure all our partners all over the world have programs that fit their needs, but also make sure that those are the right tools that will help the students succeed internationally as well. And as James said, I'll be looking after the Q&A section today. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on the questions coming in. So please, if you do have any questions or opinions you'd like to share, please pop them in the Q&A box, and I'll be sure to bring them up in the conversation as well.
Thanks, Gareth. Right, let's get straight into our first topic. Students arrive with very different experiences, often very different levels of knowledge, and always with very different levels of confidence. So the first question, Dr. Tim, from your perspective, what are the biggest gaps leaders should be paying attention to right now?
If I start from a bigger picture perspective, if you like, and think about what schools experience when they are reviewed or inspected. If your school is, say, an acceptable school, you will typically have a big long list of recommendations to address, but you'll have an acceptable capacity, if you like, in order to address those recommendations, which means when curveballs comes along, like disruption, for example, it can knock schools off the path. So schools that really focus on building capacity of their colleagues, leaders at all levels, then schools get better, and then you are inspected and you have fewer and fewer recommendations, ironically, with a big capacity to improve, given the fact that you've only got a few recommendations to address. In terms of gaps for students, it's a very similar picture. If you as a school seek to really build the capacity of your learners to be better learners, then when curveballs come along, the gaps are, yes, they are going to be there, but they will have shrunk, but the children will have a much better capacity to address those gaps. And at that point, you can turn intervention into what is often a one-size-fits-all into a much more bespoke provision. So I know when I joined Bloom, with regards to identifying gaps, after a few weeks, I said to the entire group, we've got two key priorities, which really underpin, and it's the infrastructure of what constitute that gap identification. And I said the two priorities are literacy and assessment, and really having your finger on the pulse in terms of assessment data in your schools so that you know you're working with the right information. But what schools have to do is make assessment work for them. And obviously there are different ways of doing that. And of course, we've already talked and heard from colleagues this afternoon about literacy and the challenges of teaching different cohorts of students with different levels of say, English, and we can have lots and lots of EL learners. So gaps are sometimes there by default, and they are there because sometimes we take our eye off the ball with regards to developing students as effective learners. So to flip this on its head, as in turn the question around, I think the gaps that I notice and the gaps that leaders across multiple schools notice is that when you are amidst disruption, it's the learning skills that are really pivotal and that we should focus on all the way through the academic year, where we teach the skill, we assess the skill, we feed back on the skill, and we then grow the skill, which gives the children much better capacity to be effective learners and then close their own gaps, ironically. So when I was talking to a group of students today, I asked them the question, what was the last thing you asked ChatGPT for? And typically the responses were content based. I don't know the answer to a question. I'm going to ask ChatGPT, what is the answer to that question? And I said to them, when did you last ask ChatGPT to give you some guidance on how you can be a better critical thinker? And none of the students had asked ChatGPT that information. But ironically, by being a better critical thinker, you're going to actually build your own capacity as an effective learner in order to close the gaps. So in summary, James, I think never take your eye off the literacy ball. Have your assessment finger on the pulse in your schools, but really build the capacity of your learners. And that's what we're doing at our Bloom schools. And then you get gaps not only identified, but then you can do something about it.
That's really interesting, Dr. Tim. Thank you very much for that. Before we move on to the next question, does anyone on the panel have anything they'd like to add to that? I will move on then. Jeffrey, I'm going to come to you next. How do you approach identifying priority skill gaps before they become bigger barriers to progress?
And you have your international benchmarks that you look at that are going to tell you pretty clearly where your gaps are in your school, your previous reports of attainment and progress in your school, and they stand out pretty clear. I think the parallel between that is, gaps are easy to identify if you run the numbers. And once you run the numbers, what do you do with the discrepancies? You've got the broad range of differences between those numbers. So having, a platform where you can provide the, access to success at any level within that range, where a student can engage in what Dr. Tim's talking about, in those learning skills and that progression, that student's able to learn on their own. They're able to develop that independent thinking. I think there is, when you look at the gaps and trying to close them, you begin to look at low, middle, and high. You begin to, at times, treat people differently. The perception of things begin to become a community of thought. So when you have something that can be a partner where students don't feel that there is that gap between them and their peers, I think it's a easier way of filling the gap that you find in schools, because student attainment and progress are what's driving most of what the inspection is looking at. If you're not showing progress and attainment, and when you're looking at second language learners who are operating at times 2 grade levels behind curriculum level, and you've got to show that they're operating 50% are operating above, then you got to be creative in the way that you show progress with students. They may not have reached that attainment, but they may have grown in a way that allows you to steer that conversation in a way to say, let's look at progress from a real lens of growth.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much. Gemma, I'm going to come to you next. I'd like to know, how do you think about learning continuity in a school context where students' academic, social and emotional skills start points can often be very different across the cohort?
It's a good question. I mean, if I use my own school as an example, we try not to think about that continuity as simply kind of keeping that curriculum moving. We try to think about it about maintaining like a sense of belonging, identity, if you like, and the progress regardless of where that student is starting from. So one of the biggest misconceptions that we found is, well, I suppose in education generally, is that fairness means sameness. And in reality, we find that our students arrive with very different academic experiences, emotional readiness, levels of confidence, and the varying degrees of challenges outside of school. So therefore, that kind of continuity can't necessarily mean that asking every child to move at exactly the same pace. So I guess we have to kind of think about this in layers. So from our point of view, the way that we approach things at Arbor is we think about the first layer being connection. And the whole idea of like students, they learn best when they feel safe and they feel known and they feel seen. And then the second layer, we like look at that kind of learning expectations and make that visible so students actually know what success looks like and they can access it. And then the third point in that would be the way that we use responsiveness. So that evidence, the way that we use evidence of learning to adapt, support, challenge, and opportunities in real time. So what that then does, you find, is it creates a model where every student can move forward, but not necessarily in the same way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is our belief is that consistency should exist in values and ambition, not necessarily just in all the academic outcomes that they have. And that flexibility should therefore exist in the pathways that our students get to take. And again, that kind of links quite nicely with what we do at Arbor with our integrated curriculum. So we have students there that are really invested in ecological and environmental education. So we really try and look at the way that positive education layers on top of that. And we're actually looking at their ambition, looking at their aspirations and the values that they have as human beings in order to be able to help with that continuity.
Thank you, Gemma. Clearly that resonates very well with our audience. Lots of heart and thumbs up emojis floating up the screen. I didn't realize we could do that, but please do continue to share those responses as we go through the questions. I think what we've heard over the last couple of answers there is I suppose a common theme around identifying the need and understanding where students start from. So if that's the case, the obvious next question for us is, what does schools do with when they have that information? And Gemma, I'm going to come back to you if I can. What does targeted support look like when it's done well? You've spoken to this a little bit already. I'd love for you to elaborate a bit more on how do you do this without making students feel labelled or separated?
Yeah, I mean, targeted support, it works best when it feels invisible, doesn't it? That's basically what we want. The moment it becomes something that the students feel they're being taken out for, we kind of risk unintentionally reinforcing difference rather than reducing those barriers. So again, Arbor, sorry to keep using that, but that's where I am.
That's why we brought you.
We talk less about intervention and more about access. So for us, like the good targeted support is embedded into everyday practice. So adaptive teaching, flexible grouping, we look at opportunities for that, and multiple ways to demonstrate that understanding for students, and timely feedback. And I think somebody else on the panel has already talked about kind of feedback to students. Students have to have timely feedback and they have to have those opportunities to revisit their learning. They should experience their support as normal, not as exceptional. And I think that's something that's really important when you're thinking about that kind of what targeted support looks like. But again, it comes back to that aspiration and maintaining that aspiration for our students. And support should never, ever lower expectations ever. It should always be about increasing access to that, and helping our students to really achieve it. And we really do encourage our teachers to think about what conditions do our students need in order for this learner to thrive in the environment that they're in. Because when students we get that right for our students, then they experience the support as empowerment, rather than that separation that sometimes that you might not quite get right in some schools where they really do feel like they're being segregated. We changed our inclusion department, as an example, from being called our inclusion department to be called the Thrive department. And our Thrive department is exactly that. It's about allowing students to thrive in whatever capacity that looks like.
That's fantastic. I'm going to dig a bit deeper, but I'm going to go to Lee now. Lee, when faced with the overwhelming challenge of lots of students starting at different points, how do you decide where to start first? Which students need to be supported first, and what does that look like in practice?
I think if you don't mind me disagreeing with you, James, I think everybody gets the start. This is similar. I mean, we kind of talked about this before we came on the webinar today. This is kind of the beauty of what you can do with AI if you're a good teacher. You can have everybody in a room at different starting points, but make it look like they're all working together. That way we can avoid the labeling. We can teach kids to be independent using kind of an AI tutorial presence. But at the same time, they're learning at whatever their level might be, and the teacher then becomes the facilitator that teaches them this critical thinking and how to kind of create their pathway moving forward. We here in the UAE, we've already been tasked with putting every student in your school on a tier of some sort. Everybody's on a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So it's a good thing that we don't have a choice but to do that. And so we have to identify, and I'm glad it was also said that support isn't just for students who are on or below, but support is for everybody. Support is for our gifted and talented and those who are just barely above. And we have to be able to target all of them and look for, I think it was Mr. Jeff who also talked about progress and attainment for everybody, not just those who, so to speak, need it from looking at the numbers, but for everybody in a classroom. So we have to kind of the masterful piece of this is being able to design classrooms where we can teach to every student, but still be able to keep that that family, that warm feel, that we're here together feel in the classroom, and that we're all also, it's not a student word, but non-labeled. So they've got to be able to feel like, whether they've been speaking English for 6 of their 12 years or 1 of their 12 years or whatever it might be, however old they are, they still have to feel like we're in this together. We're learning as a group. And this is kind of, this is the beauty of what is happening in educational technology right now, is there are ways that you can fashion classrooms so that you can have beginning learners, foundational learners and advanced learners learning in the same way, in the sense that they look the same and they're not seeing those differences. And then they can go out in the playground or wherever they might go and enjoy the same kind of camaraderie. It's up to the teachers and it's up to the schools to kind of maintain the social and emotional awareness and equality, for lack of a better term, but at the same time be able to speak directly to each one of those students sitting in those chairs.
Thank you very much for that. I'm gonna go to Dan next, because I think that it'd be interesting to get your perspective on how when you're using technology to deliver that structured independent learning, how do you make sure that supports teachers rather than becomes another thing for them to manage?
That is a tricky question. Lee, thank you for the nice segue as well, really. Was that, sorry, James, can you just repeat the question? Was it more about independent usage, or was it more about kind of AI in particular?
It could be about any technology. Thinking about your experience, how do you make sure that any sort of structured independent learning is a support to teachers and to students rather than just something else for teachers to manage?
Of course, yeah. I think it starts with, the lab schools are quite a good example of that, but because before we even set out to really find any educational technology that we thought could be supportive in our schools. We really identified kind of problem statements and key use cases first. Apologies for coming at this from a kind of product angle, but I think it does help, which was thinking about the kind of clear purpose that we wanted to set out with technology first. So for us, it was about producing some of our own AI tools that really focused on like the core moments of teaching. So planning, marking, and feedback. And then I know Lee mentioned it, but kind of that targeted, tailored student support in the form of an AI tutor was something else that we focused on as well. But really, they had to be designed and structured by teachers, to be honest. I mean, at its core, if you look at a lot of the Gen AI kind of chatbots, ChatGPT, Claude, etc., they're not learning tools at their core, they're productivity tools. It requires a certain amount of design to really turn it into an effective learning tool. And the only way we could do that was by bringing teachers along on the journey with us. So, like a few of the key problem statements that we kind of set out with was one of them was personalizing learning across the board, which I don't think, I'm really glad that the question was phrased in that way of varied starting points, because I think true personalization, we keep talking about it, but it's evaded AI up to this point. I think there's a certain level of personalization you can get to, but not absolute. So personalizing learning was one. Another piece that we really talked about was one of our pillars is life competencies. So after academic performance, as I'm sure is the case with most schools, what the parents of children at our schools really cared about was making sure that their kids became well-rounded individuals with the skill set to thrive beyond K-12 education as well. So we threaded lots of that through our AI tools as well, where it can kind of assess students' life competencies when they engage with the AI tutor that I've talked about as well. So I think really it's about, if you want it to be seen as something that makes teachers' lives easier, rather than an additional thing, you need to get them involved in the use cases before you even design the tool if you're building it yourselves, or before you even go out to market third-party tools that you're looking to bring into your school. So focus on use cases, focus on what you want the technology to do, rather than everything that technology can do, would be my answer.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Dan. And I heard the word thrive there again. So I think there's a theme emerging here. So far, we've explored what support can look like in practice, but of course, putting that in place is only part of the story. School leaders also need the confidence that it's making a difference. We've touched on that a bit already. Dr. Tim, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to ask, from your perspective, when leaders are looking at interventions, what evidence should they be asking for so that they know that something's actually working?
Yeah, I think there's a cycle, isn't there, that we should be following with regards to that challenge. And typically, what you want to start with is asking, where are the learners at? And the next question is, where should they be at? And of course, that's back to the comments before, James, about identifying gaps. And typically, this would sit against what a child would possibly know as a flight path, their flight path. Where are they expected to be by the end of the academic year? Do they have that information? Can they articulate where they are at in their flight path and what the next steps are that they have to take to get better? These are, important questions where, the children need to be really involved in those conversations and in that dialogue. So we ask, where are the children at? Where should they be at? And then, what actions are being taken in order to close the gaps? And of course, they are shared actions. And we only collect data, or we should only collect data that leads to actions. Schools are swimming in data. And what we've talked about and what we've listened to in the last 2 or 3 answers to questions is about that data to instruction, coming through, for example, the lesson plan. So we have lesson plans in schools. Some of them are reasonably short, as they should be. Some of them are works of art with multiple pages, and And I think, that the best thing to do and to embrace that conversation is to share the lesson plans with the students. How many schools are actually sharing their lesson planning with the students, moving from that to co-constructing lesson plans with students, then moving to the point where students are actually creating their own plans because they're directing their own learning. And I think when I see the eyes of children light up is when they tell me that they have opportunities to teach each other, assess each other, feedback to each other, both in terms of content and in terms of skill. They absolutely adore being each other's teachers. And I think this is, back to the culture of classrooms. I think obviously, moving on through the cycle, once we've looked at the actions, then we look at well, how far have you come? How do you know? Where is the evidence? And then I think it's what schools need to be very wise and strategic about is, again, don't saturate the school with the evidence collection piece. Collect evidence that's really going to tell you something and that you can act on, not just collect evidence for collecting its sake. So I think there's a real role for CPD here, and making sure that CPD is addressing the needs of the teachers to help then the development of the students in the classrooms. But then you've got to look for impact of that in really meaningful ways. And we do the typical lesson observations, learning walks, but I think discussion groups. Not just the surveys, but discussion groups with different stakeholders. I always ask schools, when did you last take a group of students on a learning walk with you? Have you trained your students in your school to be effective observers of lessons, so they can also give their steer and their thoughts into the what's going on in the school? These are all things that we can do to look for impact and to really go through that cycle of and to evaluate and then to reevaluate. So these are some of the practical strategies that we often see in schools that helps us go from that swimming in data scenario to actually really collecting data and acting on evidence that's really meaningful and targeted rather than more generic.
And do you think, a quick follow-up, if I may, do you think that school leaders in general need support with making the decision about what is going to be most valuable in terms of data collection? Because the years I spent in the classroom would suggest that's something that schools struggle with, and they do a lot of what they feel like they're meant to be doing because it's what they've always done, rather than because they know it's going to be helpful.
I think they do, James, but I think it should be done in the spirit of collaboration. Often when we think of inspections, schools feel judged or done to rather than done with. And I think the review process and that ethos around the review is pivotal. So in the reviews that myself and my team lead, it's really done in a partnership with the school. And we often talk about, have you thought about what would happen if you tried this, and get the schools to self-reflect with us as to how do you know that this initiative or this thing that you put into the school is working.
Dr. Tim, thank you very much for that. I'm going to bring Lee and Jeffrey in now, because I know that they are using ExactPath in their schools to help them with that collection of data in a meaningful way. So Lee, first of all, where have you found it most valuable, and what impact has it had on teachers and students?
Gosh, in terms of collection of data, is that what you're asking? Or
in terms of the, I suppose, yes, in terms of collection of data, but in a more rounded sense, how has it actually helped to improve teachers and students?
I guess it's interesting we're talking about it as educational technology, but I think technology has also led our students to read much less, and the usage of ExactPath has taught them some endurance as kind of a side effect, which is great. I was just going over our fall map scores with our VP, and we have improved every grade, 1 through 10, has improved anywhere from 6 points up to 20 points in the reading. And I have nowhere else to contribute that to other than, the exact path and to our teachers keeping the students engaged, with the platform. So we look at that as because they're not reading at home. We've done surveys. They don't have books. They don't have magazines at home. And this is the one place where they can read and they can read comfortably because it's automatically differentiated. So while they see their peers reading and being engaged with reading, they could be reading anywhere if they're a fourth grader from a first grade level to a seventh grade level, maybe even more. And that feeling like I'm part of something and we're doing this together, we're learning together, is really conducive and to the motivation for learning more. And I think that has a direct effect on our NWA MAP scores. And I believe that that's probably our most noticeable, observation. We also use it to look at standards and the heat maps that are delivered so we can see where group is, where a classroom group is. And if we need to kind of look at the classroom again and say, we need to shuffle these groups, this is not working this way. So it helps us stay live and stay active throughout the year as we look at the data.
That's really interesting. We often talk about exact path as being that tool for providing everyone with their differentiated path, but that's the first time I've heard someone talking about it through the lens of all the students feeling like they're together working on something and having that sense of unity. So that's really interesting and nice to hear. Jeffrey, I wonder if you'd like to add to that. I know you're also using exact path. How's that helped you and your team move from the identification phase to the let's take action phase?
Well, I always, it's hard to accomplish anything in a school without the full investment of teaching. If your teachers are on board and your teachers are your team, your teachers are what is carrying that progress. And they got a big load. I mean, you're talking about when we go back to the beginning, some that are very fluent and high achievers, and some that are even below foundational. And we, as observers and evaluators, say, hey, you have to meet all three of them in 45, 50 minutes. Show me evidence of that. How are you doing it? And then you see like one group being served and another group kind of losing interest. I mean, I think one of the things that we've always done with Exact Path is try to, let the teachers know that this is a tool to where you can set the learners off on their path, whether they be the learners that are ready for that challenge and that they can go and work on Exact Path, and I can go to my lower performing who need my direct intervention really to move in that lesson. And so I either move them in that lesson and I leave my students that are ready for more just sitting and waiting for those students to move. And so therefore they become stagnant. So I think one of the best things is it allows the teacher to become more active in that facilitator, because you can serve whatever tier you are. I like the way that we've talked about it being best when it's invisible. I like the idea of the thrive. I like the idea of as Lee was talking about, like the learners don't know they're learning differently. I think that's very important because there becomes that stigma. Once I know I'm not good in math, I'm not good in math, right? But I do believe it's a tool that the teachers can use as a resource that allows that direct intervention either to go to the top, to go to the bottom. And so those students can work for 10, 15 minutes. They're making progress. They're not losing anything in that. And that the students that need to gain to move have that opportunity without having to wait.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Quite often, one of the fears from teachers is that technology is going to displace them or make them obsolete. And it's nice to hear that that's empowering them rather than having a negative impact. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at this point, just a quick check for time. We've spent some time talking about identifying needs, putting the support in place, and importantly, understanding whether or not things are working. But as we approach the end of the year, which is coming around far too quickly, I'd like us to look ahead. I've had some interesting conversations with Dr. Tim about this previously, and I'll bring you in on this in a moment. But how do schools maintain momentum now while also preparing for, preparing for a strong finish, but also a strong start for next year? So, Dr. Tim, would you care to share on that topic? Because I know you've got some interesting approaches to the extra term that might exist within your schools.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. We sort of thought out of the box with this one, and we completely rethought out the structure of our academic year. And so in my schools, what we did was we actually began the new academic year at the beginning of June. And all the children were promoted, and they were following the curriculum in the next year up right from the beginning of June. Whilst the older children were doing all of their exams and all of that was going on, the other children could be promoted. So this means that we got back a lot of time that can often be lost in school timetables. So this was a fantastic segue also into the summer holiday and returning into the new academic year. The children had already got half a term's work underneath their belts, and they were able to just carry on where they left off as they approached September. So September was not as much of a frightening start. But we also looked at different pathways. So, for example, my Year 8 students would actually select GCSE options, and they would begin their GCSE options in Year 9. And they would do 2 years of GCSEs. But I also operated a single year GCSE model where children could then re-opt in Year 9 to do a GCSE in Year 10. So by the time my children had got to the end of Year 10, they already had 7 strong GCSEs to their names, which meant when they got to Year 11 and they did the two single year GCSEs in Year 11 to make it up to 9 or more, they were their exam timetable was just an absolute delight. They used to say to me, Dr. Tim, I've got about six exams throughout the entire exam season, when other students are hugely stressed and worried, and so they were quite relaxed about exam season. But we sort of developed these bespoke pathways. So we had a Russell Group Ivy League pathway. We had EBAC pathway that we brought in a mixture of GCSE and vocational qualifications, and then ASDAN, for example, for children with special needs, and so we really started the dialogue with children at a much younger age as to what they would like to do when they studied at university, and we backtracked from there. And of course, the questions were asked at the time about maturation and what happens when the children have finished their GCSE in Year 10 and don't do that GCSE in Year 11 and then pick it up at advanced level. So we mitigated against all of these things by careful timetable construction. Timetables are a great way of adding value in terms of progress data. Even the construction of your timetable plays a key role. Which subjects do you back against each other? Look through your timetables through the eyes of the students. Walk the timetable and see how you can make efficiencies. It's all powerful things to do. So we got back so much time because we started our academic year in June, and it was a win-win. Parents loved it, students loved it, and they felt it was much more productive, and the outcome was my data in the UK and in the UAE, shot up, and it went into the outstanding and beyond category, and it was a huge success story. So, and it's whichever curriculum that you are in, you can also do this in different in different scenarios. In the American curriculum, you can also do the same thing, and you can start the AP courses when children are in grade 8, and there's a way of clawing time back so you can actually get the most out of an academic year rather than fitting everything into the typical term 1, 2, 3 scenario that we currently experience. So these were some of the things, practical things that we did, and we also did vertical teaching, James. We had Year 10 and 11 students together. in a single year GCSE, and this was a wonderful thing to do. And everyone thought, well, this is not going to work, Dr. Tim, and of course year 11s are going to, overperform compared to the year 10s. We found, in actual fact, the opposite was true. Year 10s actually outperformed year 11 in that single year GCSE scenario. So it was a very powerful way of maintaining continuity, but really getting the most out of the academic year and making best use of time.
I think an important part of that is that student experience, and that student being the center of that thinking the whole way through. What's that going to be like for them? I've done a far less articulate job of describing that to some teachers that I was meeting with a few weeks ago, and they were concerned about the idea of overworking the students. So I shall have to put them in touch with you so they get the kind of the first class delivery of what that really looks like.
Well, as a principal, after the SATs were finished and what have you, as a principal, we used to get those emails from parents talking about not the learning time in classrooms. Now the SATs are finished, it's not being utilized as much as it should be, and parents were not happy about that. And, we used to sort of bring our games in to occupy the children's time. Let's watch some videos to kill time till we got to the end of the academic year. And of course then the teachers that take on those children in the following year think, but there's lots of learning gaps here. So when we did the restructuring, as I've described, all of those concerns and complaints disappeared because it was just business as normal, and we were already accelerating the children through, as well as having all of the EEL provision and so on, to make it much more bespoke.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Tim. I'm just mindful of time. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit down my agenda, and I'm going to introduce Gareth back into the conversation now. I can see that the chat has been going wild, which is fantastic. It's great to have some audience participation. Before we go to final thoughts, Gareth, would you like to share any of the questions which have come through either on the discussion or the Q&A?
Yeah, so like you say, there's been great comments in the chat, which has been great. Got a lot of questions here. What's been great about the webinar is very practical advice coming from all the panelists, and the questions sort of reflect that. So first question here is for Gemma. You spoke about making support feel normal rather than exceptional. Are there any sort of concrete things that schools and teachers can start doing to embed that sense in everyday practice?
I think things like learning in advance for students, especially of need, and making sure that if you have a learning support assistant in your classroom, you're actually making really good use of their time to be able to pre-teach opportunities for students that need it. I think things like allowing the students, I think it's already been spoken about here, is giving them opportunity to see what's coming up. They understand what their pathway is through the curriculum, but where they're going to. I think that's really important, and making sure that the students also, we give the curriculum maps at every beginning of every academic year. All of the teachers write these amazing curriculum maps, and they might get sent home to parents. But we actually thought to ourselves last year, like, at what point do we actually sit down with the students and go through those curriculum maps with them? And going back to what Dr. Tim was talking about there as well, is like using the opportunities at the end of the academic year, not as kind of closure to kind of put a ribbon around things, and looking at it as an opportunity for the launch for the next academic year, and giving those students opportunity to see what's coming. I would love to be in a position of what Dr. Tim was talking about there. That is just so inspiring, and I think we're nowhere near that, but it did actually give me real hope when I was listening to what he was saying about the fact that we are trying to treat at the moment term 3 as a launch, as that transition to be able to move forward. So I think giving students opportunities to see what's coming, giving them, if you've got students of determination, students that need extra help, making sure that pre-teaching material is in place and it's concrete, and really letting the students see what the journey is that they are going to be on with their curriculum is really important.
Great, thank you, Gemma. Yeah, and Dr. Tim, you talked about collecting evidence that tells you something. Is there any advice you can give on how schools can define what truly meaningful evidence looks like?
Well, let's start with less is more. Obviously, we hear the word triangulation a lot, but there are a multiple number of things that, technically speaking, should be in this triangle. It's no longer a triangle. It's more like an octagon or something like that. So less is more, but you've got to you've got to make assessment work harder, not the teachers working harder. So you've really got to be very mindful as a school as to what data you're capturing, how often are you capturing it. I did lots of it. I've done so much education research over the last 30 years or more, and I did a lot of research on how often should you capture data. I tried 6 data captures a year, more than 6. I tried 2 or 3, and out of all of that, evidence-based research, I found that 4 data captures were seemed to be an optimum for the school. And then, of course, you have to teach everybody in the school, including the stakeholders, the parents, this is how we do things at our school. And so 4 data captures gave us really meaningful data. It wasn't overwhelming the organization, but it was data then I expected to be used and acted upon with that evidence. And so you would do your look fors, whether it's your work scrutinies, your discussion groups, your lesson visits, your learning walks, and these things would pull together to help you answer that question: is what we are doing having an impact, or is what we are doing something we're doing for doing its sake? Possibly to please inspectors, for example. So we did all of that research, and so we stuck to 4 data captures, and to help with teacher workload, for example, instead of writing a big long report at the end of term 1, I told my parents I'm not doing that anymore. We're going to do just a data capture report, and then you will get a more meaningful report when more of the academic year has gone by. But we completely shifted the structure of parent teacher evenings and meetings. It was not your 5-minute appointments with different subject teachers for the teachers to say how wonderful the children are doing. It was we completely shifted the ethos of parents' evenings. And in another conversation, I might be able to explain what we did. But it was these were the things that I found to be really successful in terms of what you capture, but boy, do you have to use it. And I think schools are overwhelmed with data rather than being data savvy right now.
Great, thank you, Dr. Tim. We have some more questions, but we'll get those answered separately. I'm just conscious of time, but thanks for your questions, your comments. I'll hand back to James.
Thanks very much, Gareth. Yeah, I think if people want to get in contact with me directly using the QR codes and pick up on any of these conversations, I'd be delighted to do so. There's clearly we've opened several cans of worms, and we're not going to get through all of them before the top of the hour. So, with that in mind, before we say goodbye, I would like each of our panelists to kind of give us a 30-second final thought. Something that if school teachers and leaders who are on the webinar as guests today, if they're going to take away one thing, what should it be? So I'm going to start with Gemma.
Thank you. I think for me, it's about identifying students whose confidence, connection, or progress has been disrupted. And because obviously we're talking about kind of like continuity, and be able to help them create intentional handover. It's not just about the datas that I was saying we were talking about. It's about stories, it's about strengths, and it's about how you make those successful strategies and opportunities available for them. Because when schools create continuity with relationships and clarity of expectations and that sense of belonging, students really feel that they're going to thrive. I could use that word again. Because ultimately, for me, continuity isn't about just keeping learning going. It's about making sure that no child feels like they have to start again.
Thank you, Gemma. I will go to Lee next, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, James. If you're a leader or you're a teacher, my best advice and takeaway for this is less is more, as Dr. Tim was saying, but be honest with the data, get it out there and show them, give the parents, give the students the honest to goodness data, or you're just doing nobody favors. So you're going to have some tough conversations and say, this is what the numbers, this is the tech is trustworthy, and this is the numbers we're getting. And so this is where we start, and this is how we develop and fix.
Thank you very much, Lee. Jeffrey, would you like to go next?
Sure. I appreciate and thank you for everyone. I appreciate all your comments today. I was taking some notes about some of the things you've made, so I've learned a lot from you today, so thank you. I think the one thing we talk about is like there has to be some consistency in that thrive that Gemma keeps talking about. There needs to be consistency in that thrive. Our students need consistency. Our teachers also need consistency. So if we expect them to reach this diverse group of learners, they need a consistent tool rather than being asked to go in different areas to find different things to bring it together. So I believe the one thing that you have to have, and what I'm learning from this, is that there's a lot of data that takes you in a lot of different directions. But that data's got to bring you to some consistency in the direction you're going, and it needs to narrow where you're going rather than broaden it. So you have to have clear targets. So I appreciate the consistency.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Of what we're talking about today.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I appreciate it. Could we go to Dan next?
Yeah, of course. I think coming at it from an EdTech perspective, it was really interesting listening to Jeffrey, to you speak, and Lee as well, actually. Everyone on the panel, but particularly two things that you both said, which is about even with EdTech, right? I don't think the consistency comes from the tool itself ever. I think it's helpful to see kind of a familiar name, a familiar EdTech tool, but I think it comes from that continuity, comes from the shared systems of practice and the culture that drives it as well. I think you really have to have a shared culture amongst your teachers and amongst your students to really identify the value and impact that a piece of educational technology brings. And I think it's really key that you have that in a time of disruption. Yeah, I can see in the comment that's true change management. It is change management. If you want consistency in times of disruption, you have to have consistency and continuity when things are good and everything's all rosy as well. So I think it all comes back to, even when technology is involved, it's about those shared systems of practice and the shared kind of culture of investment in making sure that EdTech's as impactful as possible.
Thank you, Dan. Dr. Tim, I've given you the unenviable challenge of trying to do this in 30 seconds, so I'll let you have
I think just to sum it up for me, that the conversation's largely been about culture of classrooms. What's happening in your classrooms, in your schools, all day, every day? How do you know? Where are the successes? Where are the pain points? How are you differentiating your CPD so that your teachers and your leaders are growing, building their capacity in order to build the capacity of the children, so that any disruptions that come along in future, we can smooth out the waves and the challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Tim. Thank you to all of our panelists. We are now at the top of the hour, and I'm sure people have commitments they need to get to, so I will try and wrap this up very, very quickly. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Gareth, for supporting, and thank you for all the team at Edmonton for making the webinar possible. The QR codes that are about to appear on the screen can be used to either book an appointment with me directly, or to book on to see Exact Path on the 16th of June. We've heard about it a number of times. Some of you in the audience will be wondering what it looks like, what it does, and whether or not it could be used to support you in your school. So 16th of June, we'll be doing a webinar. If you want to get in contact with me directly beforehand, please do so.